You think Viking warriors feasted like kings before storming the battlefield? Think again. Their pre-battle meals weren't grand banquets, they were survival-driven, brutal, and often downright bizarre. From blood-thick stews to shark meat buried underground for months, what these Norse fighters consumed tells a much darker story than legend lets on. By the end of this video, you'll not only know what fueled the fiercest warriors in history, you might start questioning what you put on your own plate. Blood stews. Imagine the smell of iron-rich steam rising from a pot over an open flame, thick and dark, like war itself was boiling. Before battle, Viking warriors didn't dine for pleasure. They fueled their bodies with whatever gave them the strength to cleave through shields and survive the night. And few things packed that kind of power like blood stew. Known as broth, this gruesome yet efficient meal was a staple among Viking fighters. Made primarily from fresh animal blood, usually from pigs, goats, or cattle, this viscous liquid was thickened with barley, one of the few reliable grains of the north. Onions were added not for taste, but for digestion and energy. The final product was more of a blood porridge than a stew. Hot, dense, and absolutely brimming with iron. In a world where cold winds cut through bone and days of fighting left warriors weak and bloodied, broth was a quick way to replenish lost nutrients. Iron helped with oxygen transport in the blood essential, when every heartbeat could be the difference between life and death. Protein and fat from the added organs or bone bits provided lasting energy, even through grueling marches or long sieges. But there was more to it than nutrition. There was ritual. Some warriors believed consuming the blood of an animal before battle transferred its strength and ferocity. In certain sagas, it's hinted that elite fighters preferred the blood of wild boar creatures associated with the god Freyr, linked to fertility and battle prowess. The stew didn't taste good. It wasn't meant to. It was meant to wake the body, fuel the fire, and remind a man what he was made, all flesh, blood, and fury. Dried fish, whale meat. If you wandered the wind-swept coastlines of Viking settlements, you'd see them hanging like leathery flag strips of dried fish swaying in the sea air, hardened by salt and thyme. This was stockfish, air-dried cod, and it was more than food. It was survival. Unlike fresh meat, which spoiled quickly without refrigeration, stockfish could last for years if kept dry. It was tough, almost like wood at times, and had to be beaten with a hammer before eating. But once softened and cooked, it delivered a dense hit of protein and salt, two vital elements for warriors who didn't know when their next real meal might come. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Vikings traveling by sea kept bundles of dried fish in their ships, ready to eat with little more than water and fire. It was portable, durable, and didn't rot even under the deck of a longship for months at a time. But along the coasts, particularly in Iceland and the northern reaches of Norway, there was something even more extreme: whale meat. When a whale beached or was hunted rare, but not unheard of, no part of the massive creature was wasted. Flesh, fat, and even skin were preserved using salt, smoke, or cold. In the harsh northern climate, fermentation also became a method of preservation. Some whale meat was consumed raw, especially by warriors in remote regions with limited resources. Other parts were smoked over seaweed or moss fires, giving it a bitter, earthy flavor. While not every Viking ate whale meat regularly, it was considered a powerful source of strength and endurance when available. The fat content was enormous, perfect for warriors who needed reserves of energy in cold climates and brutal battles. And yet, for all its usefulness, this kind of food paints a clear picture of the Viking world: gritty, relentless, and driven not by taste but by necessity. Fermented, shark hackerl. There are foods that test your courage. And then there's dish that doesn't just challenge the stomach, but assaults every sense. Fermented shark, still eaten in Iceland today, is a brutal relic of Viking-era survival that tells us just how far Norse warriors were willing to go to endure the unforgiving north. The Greenland shark, a slow-moving predator of the icy deep, was never meant to be eaten raw. Its flesh is naturally toxic-rich in urea and trimethylamine oxide. But the Vikings found a way to make it edible, not by cooking, but by rotting. After a shark was caught, its body was buried in a shallow pit and covered with gravel and stones. There it stayed for months, slowly fermenting. The process neutralized the toxins, though it came at a steep cost. The resulting meat reeked of ammonia and decay. After fermentation, it was cut into strips and hung to dry for several more months, forming a chewy, rubbery texture with a smell that could make a grown man gag. Why eat this? Because in the harsh Icelandic terrain, food options were scarce, and waste was not an option. The shark was massive and packed with fate essential for survival during long, freezing winters. And for warriors, it became more than just nourishment. It was a test of willpower. Consuming hakarl before battle wasn't about flavor, it was about fortitude. To eat something that smelled like cleaning chemicals and tasted like death itself was, in a way, preparation for the horrors of war. If you could get through that first bite without retching, you could probably handle anything on the battlefield. And there was pride in it. Passing down the knowledge of how to ferment shark properly was a rite of resilience, proof that Viking endurance wasn't just forged in battle, but at the dinner table too. Bone marrow broth. Long before energy drinks and protein bars, Viking warriors turned to something far more primal for strength: bone marrow broth. It was not glamorous, but it was potent elixir, born of necessity, simmered for hours until it became a thick, golden fuel for battle. In the Viking world, nothing from a kill was wasted. Bones, especially from large animals like cattle, deer, or even seals, were cracked open to reveal the marrow inside a soft, fatty substance rich in calories and nutrients. These bones were tossed into large pots and boiled for hours, sometimes days, over open flames. As the heat worked its way through the dense material, it released collagen, gelatin, and fat, turning the water into a thick, hearty broth that was both easy to digest and shockingly nourishing. For a warrior facing cold nights and colder battles, this broth offered more than sustenance. It was strategic. High in fats and proteins, it provided long-lasting energy. It soothed the stomach, hydrated the body, and was often enhanced with additions like wild herbs, seaweed, or even pieces of dried fish to boost flavor and nutrition. But the broth's value wasn't only physical. There was something sacred about it. Some Viking groups treated the boiling of bones as a ritual act, drawing not just strength from the animal, but its spirit. Marrow, hidden deep within the bones, was considered by some to be the source of life itself. Drinking it was akin to absorbing the very essence of nature's resilience. It was common to prepare large batches before a campaign, letting the broth cool and congeal into a jelly-like mass that could be reheated quickly when needed. Portable, high energy, and deeply nourishing, it became a staple among seasoned fighters and seasoned cooks alike. In the end, this wasn't just food, it was strategy in a bowl, brewed from fire, bone, and the relentless will to survive. Forest-foraged additions. The Viking diet wasn't built on brute force alone, it was sharpened in the wild, foraged from forests that offered more than just timber. Beneath the canopy of birch and pine, Norse warriors found a pharmacy of the earth, ingredients that didn't just add flavor, but power, balance, and even calm before chaos. While meats and stews fueled the body, it was what the Vikings gathered from the woods that often protected them from illness and gave them an edge in the field. Wild onions and garlic, with their pungent aroma and antibacterial properties, were prized not only for taste but for their ability to ward off infection and stimulate the blood. Mushrooms, some edible, others medicinal, were carefully identified and used to enhance stews or boiled into tonics believed to sharpen the senses. Berries were another vital addition. Raspberries, lingonberries, bilberries. These forest gems weren't just sweet, they were packed with antioxidants, long before that word ever existed. Dried or fresh, they could be eaten alone or mixed into bread, porridge, or broth, offering bursts of energy and subtle sweetness amid otherwise harsh meals. But perhaps the most curious habit of Viking warriors was their use of tree bark, particularly birch. Chewing on birch bark wasn't just a boredom habit. It had astringent, calming properties, and some warriors believed it helped steady the nerves before battle. Rich in xylitol and salicylates, birch bark acted as a mild analgesic, soothing inflammation, and even minor pain. Think of it as a natural precursor to aspirin, tucked into the belt of a battle-hardened raider. These forest additions tell a different story than the bloody, bone-rich meals we often imagine. They reveal a people who observed, experimented, and adapted. Vikings didn't just survive, they learned from the land, using its quiet gifts to sharpen their strength and balance their brutality. For a people defined by war, the forest was a healer, and that made it just as important as any sword. Viking hard bread, flatbread. When we imagine the Viking table, we often picture roaring fires, slabs of meat, and horns of mead. But among these dramatic staples was something far humbler: flatbread, the Viking hard bread. Thin, crisp, and seemingly insignificant, This bread was a quiet hero in the Norse warrior's diet. Flatbread was made primarily from barley or oat flour, two grains that grew well in the rocky, cold climates of Scandinavia. Wheat was rare and reserved for the wealthier classes or sacred rituals. Instead, Vikings relied on these tougher grains to create a dough that could be rolled thin, baked on hot stones or iron griddles, and then dried until it snapped like a cracker. What made flatbread essential wasn't its taste or texture, it was its durability. Once dried, it could last for months without spoiling, even in the damp holds of ships or deep within travel packs. It was light, stackable, and required no preservation beyond air and patience. This made it the ideal field ration, especially for warriors who might be gone for weeks at sea or marching inland toward battle. But there was more to this bread than convenience. Flatbread was a blank canvas. It could be crumbled into broth, layered with dried fish, or used as a crude utensil for scooping marrow or stew. It absorbed flavor, held together meals, and added crunch to otherwise soft, heavy foods. And though it wasn't luxurious, it held cultural weight. In many homes, women baked flatbread in large quantities before seasonal raids or winter hunts, sending their sons and husbands off with stacks of sustenance made by hand. The bread became a symbol of preparation, care, and resilience, a literal taste of home carried into war. For Viking warriors, flatbread wasn't just food. It was planning, endurance, and the quiet strength of something that doesn't break under pressure, it simply gets harder. Mead, but not just for drinking. When most people think of Vikings and mead, they picture long feasts, overflowing horns, and warriors roaring in drunken celebration. But while mead did fuel the fires of revelry, it had another, quieter role steeped in ritual, strategy, and survival. Mead, at its core, is a fermented drink made from honey, water, and yeast. But in the Viking world, it wasn't just a drink, it was a base, a foundation, a carrier of herbs, roots, and secrets passed down by healers and warriors alike. Before battle, some Viking warriors drank mead, mixed with calming herbs like chamomile or valerian rutan, ancient form of liquid courage designed not to intoxicate, but to settle the nerves. Others preferred more invigorating blends, infused with stimulants like angelica root or yarrow, which sharpened the mind and increased endurance. These weren't random additions, they were intentional, crafted by women and healers who knew which herbs could awaken the spirit or silence fear. Mead was also used as a preservative. Certain meats and berries were stored in mead to extend their shelf life and infuse them with both sweetness and antibacterial properties. In some cases, warriors carried small vials of herbal mead as part of their travel rations, not just for drinking, but for treating wounds or illnesses on the road. And then there was ritual. Mead flowed at funerals, oaths, and before great battles. It was offered to the gods, especially Odin, the Allfather, who was said to have traded an eye for wisdom and often associated with poetic inspiration skaldskapur, which mead was believed to awaken. To drink mead was to connect to something older, deeper, and sometimes divine. For Viking warriors, mead wasn't just about the fire in their bellies, it was about balance, hype, and calm.